Welcome back to Tox News. I am still here, your wacko weirdo rebel scum Jedi hero. And now I want to get into a react to two videos. One being from Prager University, a not real university that tends to peddle right-wing ideas in short little snack bites of 5 minutes. I've covered their videos before, many people have. And to kind of balance things out a little bit, because this is a versus video, we're going to get into a Gravel Institute video. After, I think Mike Gravel is his name, if I'm not mistaken. He was a Democrat who had run for office back in 2012, 2016, and yeah, it's Mike Gravel. He ran in 2008 actually, maybe 2012, not 100% sure, but I know for sure 2016 and 2020's ticket for a little bit. He's definitely a bit more socialist than he is an actual Democrat, but he was part of the Democratic Party for a while, and he was also senator of Alaska from 1969 to 1981. But shortly after he retired from politics itself, his name became the Gravel Institute, which H. John Benjamin, I think his name was. Man, I'm having a bad time remembering names. Yeah, H. John Benjamin, a.k.a. Archer, a.k.a. Bob from Bob's Burgers. He did their first video kind of putting out a mission statement for what the intentions of the Gravel Institute were. That being to be reactionary and a refutation to PragerU. Because right-wing ideas seem to have a lot of backing from PragerU with its 5-minute snack bites, and the left didn't seem to have quite the same kind of reach. But today we're going to get a cold reacts to both channels. So PragerU most recent video is called A Father's Questions for Black Lives Matter. And then Gravel Institute gets into Why America Throws the Poor in Prison. Two differing subjects, really, in some ways, and if you're going to ignore intersectionality. But I think the information within them kind of highlights exactly how PragerU presents its information versus how Gravel Institute does. So, to begin with, this is Tox News, so we're going to start with the right wing. Let's get it.
I consider myself to be a typical Main Street American. One thing that is different about
his name is Dan Collins. He is a father and business owner. Let's go to Google and see if we can get a little bit more context. This one says journalist. This one says American football. So this Dan Collins that they got specifically does not seem to have much of a public personality. Maybe he's... No, I don't know if that's him necessarily. Yeah, so the only thing that I can find on YouTube on Dan Collins is this video specifically. So
me is that I have a big family. Not so common in America these days. I'm the proud father of 13 children. 8 are white and 5 adopted are black. My family is my greatest joy, and my life is dedicated to their well-being and happiness. I'm struggling right now because I genuinely don't know how best to support my black children through this tumultuous and painful period in our history. Some say I should get involved with the Black Lives Matter movement, while others say I should avoid it at all costs. To help me figure this out, I have some questions for the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Before asking, let me preface my questions with some background.
And I'm also genuinely curious that if he thought asking these questions through PragerU would actually reach the global Black Lives Matter movement. Most people who watch PragerU do not support Black Lives Matter, so it's very curious to me why he would choose this platform to ask them these questions rather than hosting a forum with the actual global leaders of Black Lives Matter.
In the summer of 2020, a peaceful BLM demonstration in my hometown of La Mesa, California, turned violent as protesters began rioting, looting, and setting fires. The next day, I took my 14-year-old.
It's very curious to me also that right wingers equate violence with vandalism. I think it's a bit denigrating to the word violence because when we say a police officer commits violence against a black individual, that doesn't equate to a rioter breaking glass windows. Most buildings are insured. People's lives, on the other hand, not quite as easily replaced.
Black Sun downtown to help with the cleanup. As we walked past the charred remains of Chase Bank, I noticed the letters BLM graffitied onto a wall amid the rubble. It was unsettling, as if Black Lives Matter was claiming credit for the bank's destruction.
That's an interpretation of it. Like if I spray painted the McDonald's symbol on a building, I doubt people would say that McDonald's is claiming credit for that. I would really doubt it. Especially if like, it was after a bunch of people came through the streets. It's so weird. I can see where he's making this through line here, but it's not really like the best point to make, but I can kind of see what he's going for since the vandalism was caused by a protest and now they've left their marker behind to let you know who did it. But it's just like, it's kind of flimsy just because graffiti like can be done by anybody, the same as like broken windows. You'll never really see a protester who actually organizes with Black Lives Matter participate in any rioting whatsoever, mainly because that hurts the movement. So anybody who is actually a part of doing these social justice progressive things isn't going to want to partake in rioting and vandalizing because that hurts the movement ultimately.
I didn't want to believe that. Just as any parent who has adopted and biological children, I love them all the same. Obviously, I never want to see any of them wrongly accused, mistreated, or targeted because of their skin color. I would happily support any peaceful movement that helps to secure racial justice and equality. I also recognize the need for law and order. No community can survive, let alone thrive, without that.
I mean, like the Joker said, we live in a society. So, like, in order to have a society, you have to have laws and you have to have an order to things. The unfortunate thing is, though, is that since like the 60s, law and order, maybe even sooner than that, but law and order has been used as a dog whistle as like a term for like rounding up all those wily black people. So it's just really hard to hear you say that you support racial justice and equality, but then on the other hand support law and order when these terms have taken on contemporary meanings that don't necessarily mean what you're intending to say them as right now. Yeah.
This is the source of my conflict and confusion. Is it possible for my family to support the Black Lives Matter movement while also supporting the police? I went to your website.
I definitely think it's possible. The unfortunate thing is, though, is that you can end up supporting policies that end up contradicting each other. So if you support police to the point that you don't think their funds should be reallocated, then you're not necessarily supporting the summer aims of the Black Lives Matter movement, which was to defund sections of the police to reallocate those funds into something more productive and resourceful, honestly. And just recently in Denver, they had for 6 months, they had social workers responding to mental health calls, which reduced a lot of violence. And even the police chief had said that it had saved lives. And so when we have that conversation of defunding the police, it's more about reallocating those funds into something more useful than just constantly throwing people in prison. So you can support police, like the idea of them having a peacekeeping force, but you have to wonder if the policies, stances that you're taking actually hurt one movement over the other that you support.
Looking for answers, but I came away with more questions. You state that your mission is to eradicate.
And the thing is too is I want to make my position a little bit more clear is that um you can't necessarily support racial justice by keeping the police force that we have as is, mainly because the police force that we have has been cultivated from an era of rounding up slaves as property and returning them to their owners. So there's a lot going on here with how the foundations of the police were founded on racial inequality, and we've kind of built upon that throughout history, and now it's making the idea of keeping the police force as we know it and racial justice, racial equality, building that as kind of contradictory, collapsing positions. So, yeah, that's where I sit. And I think if we're going to have a peacekeeping force, that we have to completely restructure it and reform it, like abolish the one we have now and completely start anew. But for the centrists, when we talk about defunding the police, it's merely talking about reallocating funds. There is no abolishment of police whatsoever. I think the city council in Minneapolis had voted to actually defund their police, so much so that they would have to create a peacekeeping force. But for most places outside of Minneapolis, they haven't gone that far and do not intend to go in that far. But I agree with Minneapolis's position, mainly because back in the day, police forces were merely around to round up slaves and return them back to their owners. So if we can build a new peacekeeping police force built on the opposite of that and merely on making sure that communities are as safe as possible, not facing violent crime, there's a different story to have here. And I like so far what Denver did with the social workers, because it did decrease the amount of incarceration and possible lives at risk. And it sounds like it was successful with the chief of police in Denver. So it might be a model that other cities and states can, shape their policies around. But ultimately, I sit on the stand that we need to rethink entirely what police are and what they do.
Eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes. But you don't explain how you're going to do that. What is your definition of white supremacy, of local power? By state, I assume you mean police.
Does he not know what white supremacy means? Because if so, he could use the model that PragerU put in this video and Google it. And if you don't know what local power means either, you need to Google that as well. And if you can assume what the state means, then I can assume that you can assume what local power and white supremacy means. This is very strange.
Who are the vigilantes you're referring to? And how do you propose to intervene in violence?
Vigilantes. When they're speaking of vigilantes, you can think of the Abed. What was his? I had his name for a second there. Ahmaud Arbery? Ahmaud Arbery, sorry. You can think of that when Ahmaud Arbery was jogging in his neighborhood and then was hunted down by white people in a pickup truck. You can think of that as vigilantes. Those were vigilantes who thought that they had to take it into their own hands, even though Arbery had not robbed anybody.
Violence inflicted on black communities. Honestly, I can't tell whether you intend to pursue your mission through peaceful or violent methods. Until recently, your website also declared that you will...
What do you mean you can't tell?
...disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Does my family fit that description? Why would you want to disrupt my family structure?
And I like how he took that personally as well. I think what Black Lives Matter had ultimately said there is that they want to disrupt the stereotypical nuclear family as the thing that everybody must have, especially since we've moved into the modern era where there are more homosexual families. The homosexual family in itself does not fit the nuclear family. They're not out to disrupt your personal family, just the idea that a nuclear family has to be the way that society is structured. But I'm glad he took it like really personally, and that's why he's against the movement.
That language has been quietly removed. Does that mean that you no longer hold that view?
I think it's good that they they took that off of their website, mainly because they didn't like expand upon that exactly on what that means, and it allowed like a lot of the right wingers to do exactly what Dan Collins is doing right now, which is accusing them of trying to destroy his family.
Or was it just the expedient thing to do? I reached out to my local chapter of Black Lives Matter, hoping to speak with someone who could help me sort all this out. I then contacted your regional and national headquarters. I got no response. So I began doing my own research.
I mean, we have to take his word on that, on whether or not he actually spoke to any of these people or tried to
That led
reach
me to
out.
an interview on the internet with one of your founders, Patrice Cullors. We are trained Marxists, she said. We are super versed on ideological theories. Which theories are those? Is Black Lives Matter a Marxist-inspired organization? Marx advocated for the forcible overthrow of our civilization. Is that
No, he didn't. No, no, he didn't. And I'm not even going to get into the refutation of that, because there's no point. It's a bad faith argument because it's misrepresenting Karl Marx's position. So I'm not even going to get into that.
what BLM wants also? I have a few more questions. As an organization, do you believe in and support the Constitution? Do you honor the flag, or do you view it as a symbol of oppression? Do you believe that people should be primarily judged by the content of their character or the color of their skin? Do you support or condemn destruction of personal and private property of others? Do you believe in the defacing and destruction of statues, monuments, and other public property?
See, and this is all rhetorical because he's not actually speaking to anybody who could answer his questions right now. And I think overall, this is mostly just kind of giving like viewers of PragerU an arsenal of skeptical, rhetorical questions that they can continue to ask, rather than really like searching within themselves if they support the ultimate aims of Black Lives Matter, which is to, raise the level of racial justice and equality.
Do you believe that police departments need to be reformed, or to be defunded, or to be eliminated altogether? I am one of countless Americans who want answers, but I can't seem to get any. From all reports, you've raised millions of dollars in support of your organization. What are you doing with that money? Are you using that money in some way to help Black communities? No one seems to know. I humbly propose that you use some of that money to help Black people who have been harmed by the destruction that has accompanied BLM protests. I'm thinking of the many Black business owners whose shops were destroyed by riots in your name.
The unfortunate thing here too is that he's not citing any of these businesses, and he's showing like really the PragerU video has like really old pictures with like modern cars in front of a couple of them, and the buildings seem to have cartoon fires around them. So like again, we're working in a hypothetical space that doesn't allow good faith arguments to create a discussion that is worthy of productiveness. Like this is all rhetorical skepticism that it arms PragerU viewers from actually accepting or really even doing more research for themselves.
I'm thinking of the family of David Dorn, the Black retired police captain who was shot and killed while trying to protect a friend's pawn shop from looters. With all my heart, I believe that Black Lives Matter. I would like to support Black Lives Matter, the organization, in an effort to support my Black children, but it's hard to do so if I don't know your beliefs and goals. Speaking as a father and as a typical American, I look forward to your answers. I'm Dan Collins for Prager University.
So I'm genuinely curious too that if like I don't know, the heads of Black Lives Matter see this video, if they're actually going to reach out to Dan Collins, and if Dan Collins would then make a follow-up video and say, I got my answers, here are the answers to those questions, because I highly doubt it. I really do. I think this was only created to create an arsenal of questions that they're either the viewers can answer for them with their own opinions, or for them to just constantly act skeptical towards any actions whatsoever that may be somewhat related to a BLM protest. So let's go down to these comments. Oh, they have the script. Oh, the whole script. Where do they hide the comments these days, huh? All right, 1,069. Nice. All right, let's go up, go up, down. A Stoic's door. This dude ain't ever going to get a straight answer from BLM because BLM has nothing to do with Black lives. Okay. Let's see some replies. This guy says the more concerning thing is that all of these questions were already answered last year multiple times through their words and actions. He's pretending he doesn't know. The video is pandering. Okay. And a response to that one says it's not pandering, but instead meant to get people to really think about and research the answers themselves, which I'm sure Aaron Spillman did not do. That was the guy who responded to that earlier. And then another response to that was, I don't think he's pandering. What he's doing is forcing BLM to plainly state their intentions. Yes, by uploading, by doing a PragerU video, you are forcing BLM to do anything. He's comparing BLM's actions to their so-called principles, even though the rioters can't always be equated to BLM because it may not be done by members of BLM. And I've already brought the example of the Hell's Angel in Minneapolis many times. Things are much more complicated than people like to admit. But the thing is that the far right tends to kind of give simple answers because that's really all people are looking for is answers. And the simpler they are, the better it is. If the world is gray, it's going to be hard for people to distinguish good between evil, black between white. But if it's just black and white, well, shit, then we can start getting a movement going. All right. Anyways, let's find another comment. They've written out their beliefs already. They're not for the black community, but for their own political narratives. Wake up, America. Again, that's merely from one point of view who probably has not done much research of their own. Let's continue scrolling down, find another comment. We are trained Marxists. What other answers do you need? And this comes from the massive propaganda machine in the United States that has made Marxism and anything related to it basically an unviable political ideology. And then we get told that solving this problem that affects families and providing a solution to fix up broken families and improve future lives is both racist and sexist and should not be taught because it criticizes culture. I'm not even sure what that person is referring to. It's lucrative to females to stay single and have government assistance than it is to keep the father around to provide money for his family? No. No, this person is obviously a male who has not. No. No. I'd like to answer to those questions too. Money donated to BLM went straight to the Democrat Party. And this is the thing with the Act Blue website, a conspiracy theory that Act Blue directs like all of the money to the Democrat Party when it's actually a platform allowing Democrats to donate to platforms that they support, such as Black Lives Matter, which seems to be a Democratic platform, although not really. It's not really. BLM still has to pressure Democrats about as much as they do Republicans, if not more. But Republicans tend to be more stonewallish than the Democrats do when it comes to racial justice and equality. But that's just the contemporary times we live in. Yep, this guy said the same thing. Come on. We are trained Marxists. That's all I would need to hear. All right, let's read one more comment before we get into the gravel. I will tell you where the money is going. Last year, a BLM leader was arrested for using $200K of its donated money for tailored suits, a house, and guns. Citation needed. Said, what the love, Rayla? For some reason, YouTube will not allow me to post the link of the article, but here is a little more context. Sir Major Page, 32, was arrested Friday in Toledo, Ohio, and is facing federal wire fraud and money laundering charges for allegedly spending the money on tailored suits, a home in Ohio, and guns. Quote, numerous videos and live stream videos were posted to Page's personal social media pages showing himself in what appeared to be newly purchased clothing, hotel rooms, and office space in Atlanta, the FBI said in its release. Quote, several audio statements are made by Page in the videos boasting about the money he has. Sir Major Page. Let's hit the Google. The FBI announces the arrest of Sir Major Page. A complaint was filed with the FBI's National Threat Operations Center in April, alleging that Page was fraudulently utilizing a Black Lives Matter nonprofit organization by way of misrepresentations and by posing as a Black Lives Matter leader. So, not actually even a part of Black Lives Matter. All right, that was easy. That was probably in the same thing. And this like comes directly from FBI.gov. So, cool. That was really easy. And that seems to what happened, like that seems to be what's happening most to the BLM movement, is that somebody who supports them or, has been vocal in their support of BLM and gets caught fucking up or doing something that's not necessarily legal, and then BLM takes most of the flack for it because that hurts the movement ultimately and benefits Republicans from doing anything at all. All right, so good bad faith reporting from PragerU as always. Let's get into Gravel Institute and feel the contrast.
Sean Worsley, a veteran, sentenced to 5 years in prison in Alabama for using medicinal marijuana he'd been legally prescribed to treat a traumatic brain injury. Fairwayne Bryan, 63 years old, sentenced to life in prison for stealing a pair of hedge clippers because 18 years before he had been convicted of robbing a taxi driver. Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old held in prison for 3 years in New York for allegedly stealing a backpack, charged but never put on trial. Beaten by prison guards and placed in solitary confinement for 2 years, he attempted suicide twice in prison. Still traumatized, he committed suicide at his mother's home after being released. These are just 3 drops in a sea of similar stories all across the United States. Why are these stories so common? One of the ugly truths about our country is that we lock up a higher percentage of our people than any other nation on earth. In fact, we imprison more people than any other country, period.
Hold on, I got the name of the gentleman in the PragerU video. Allow me to get his name. This is Chase Madar. He's a professor of law.
In fact, we imprison more people than any other country, period. We are the biggest prison in the world. We have a significantly larger prison population, 2.1 million people, than China, a country with 3 times our population. Why does the United States lock up so many of its people? More than the entire population of New Mexico. Where did this wholesale imprisonment of huge groups of people, what we call mass incarceration, come from?
Land of the free.
Let's go back a few decades. Starting in the 1960s, many companies looking to cut costs moved production out of big cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, or simply automated away big chunks of their workforce. Their employees...
See, and here's the thing that I'm already digging about this Gravel video is that it gives historical context to how we got to the position that we're in now. I don't think every PragerU video does that. They do give a little bit of history from time to time, but not necessarily the whole context to understand the situation. So I'm very already into this.
Were left jobless, and manufacturing was ripped out of great cities.
And that's because, like, if you want to know what's going on today, then you have to look at what happened in the past. So I'm going to begin this over again because I've been interrupting.
Let's go back a few decades. Starting in the 1960s, many companies looking to cut costs moved production out of big cities like Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, or simply automated away big chunks of their workforce. Their employees were left jobless, and manufacturing was ripped out of great cities that used to be synonymous with industry. After 1970, unemployment for non-college educated men soared, especially black people who were just then entering the middle class. People who could leave the cities, mostly middle-class whites, fled to the suburbs, a phenomenon we call white flight. This led to a vicious spiral. Cities lost tax revenue, schools lost funding, houses lost their value, local economies collapsed, job opportunities dried up. As urban poverty rose, crime rose with it, and the arrival of crack cocaine in the 80s, helped along by U.S. foreign policy in Central America, made the problem even worse.
See, and this kind of shows how much like white privilege or white supremacy had a toll on these things, even though they're not necessarily highlighting it here. It's a little bit of like the through line that I had seen, and that the white flight, which is basically probably the majority of the economy of Detroit, moved outside of Detroit because there was too many black people in that area, which then furthered the decline in tax revenue. With that happening, then the basically everybody who was still left in Detroit was left on their own means. And with the introduction of crack cocaine, that was persecuted much harder than cocaine was. And you can get even an understanding from Kendrick Lamar's music on how that hurt his upbringing, because crack cocaine was mostly associated with black people and they persecuted them hard for it, while cocaine was associated with rich white people and seemed to have lesser charges than crack cocaine did at the time.
By the 1970s and 80s, there was a full-blown social crisis in American cities, resulting in a steady increase in crime. Now, American politicians could have responded one way. They could have confronted the root causes of crime by reinvesting in hollowed-out cities, building a healthier, cleaner, more prosperous society. But that is not what they did. Instead, they unleashed a tsunami of incarceration. They chose to lock up millions of people rather than accept the type of broad redistribution of wealth, jobs, and power that a real solution would have demanded. Mass incarceration.
And honestly, that's like, that phrase is something that the upper class hates and will do anything to avoid the redistribution of wealth. And most of that does come through with how America's set up through the tax system. And as we've seen, the top 1% continues to pay less and less in taxes, while the middle class and lower class takes on the burden, and thus completing the cycle of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer.
Incarceration is expensive. But for the well-off, it turns out to be a lot cheaper than actually solving the problem. So the U.S. government decided to combine the harshest penal state in the world with the stingiest welfare state. And this carceral approach was also effective politics, with white voters terrified of rising crime from increasingly non-white cities. Republicans and Democrats alike saw a way to exploit racist fears and get cheap votes. It started with Richard Nixon's promise of law and order in 1968. Ronald Reagan vowed to get tough on crime in the 80s.
You remember when I had said that we do need laws and organization order in order to have a society? But here, even this video in itself did bring up that Nixon used the term as more of a dog whistle to say that we need to round up all these wily black people from destroying our communities. It has not ended being that kind of term.
By 1996, a Democrat like Hillary Clinton was warning of young, quote, super predators with, quote, no conscience, no empathy, people who must be, quote, brought to heel. Over those decades, politicians from both parties and at all levels passed harsher and harsher laws feeding the prison system. The war on drugs started in 1971. Cruel mandatory minimum laws came in the 1980s. 3 strikes laws arrived in the 90s. You could be put away for life without parole for stealing a pair of socks if it was your third offense. Tough on crime prosecutors and judges gained office across the country. Huge sums of money were spent on building new prisons, which housed millions of people. As a result, incarceration rose dramatically. In 1968, America's prison population was 102 per 100,000 people, in line with other developed countries. By 2005, it had risen sevenfold to 737 per 100.
Holy crap, that graph is horrifying. As something that constantly says that it is the land of the free, this graph is horrifying.
The highest in the world. Even as crime fell, with murders in New York dropping 90% in the 90s, mass incarceration kept on growing. Why didn't prison populations fall once crime started declining? It's because prisons are by no means only about crime. They're also about keeping the least advantaged people in line. Prison has become the place to warehouse people with mental illnesses, people experiencing homelessness, and people with addictions that the system is not designed to help.
And I want to highlight a book that I read a few years ago by Michel Foucault that goes into madness and civilization, and it gives a broader context and history on how we've treated people with mental conditions who don't fit inside the neurological standard that we attribute to quote-unquote productive members of society. So I would say for a broader understanding of how we've continued to dehumanize these people, Michel Foucault, I think, has a pretty good book about it. And it really dives into the medieval ages because then it was some dark stuff.
Instead of solving these problems, we use prison to disappear the people who have these problems. With this surging population, prisons are crowded and violent. People in prison are robbed of their humanity, often brutalized by guards, and without real rehabilitation or good options for reentry into society, are sometimes turned into the hardened criminals the system believes them to be.
And I mean, Shawshank Redemption is like an also great movie to like kind of apply to this a bit because they spend 40 years in jail and the whole industrial revolution just completely overtakes them. And as soon as they come out into society after serving their sentence, they have no way to cope with how society has advanced well beyond their understanding of it, because prison is not meant to rehabilitate criminals or human beings, but merely to keep them away from others.
That's why academic evidence suggests that prisons make people more likely to engage in criminal behavior, not less. You can't eradicate crime without eradicating the root causes of crime, including prison. And it was poor and non-white communities that were the hardest hurt by deindustrialization and then criminalized by the state. Black men born between 1965 and 1969 have been more likely to go to prison than to graduate from college. Less educated people in general are victim to this. A white man without a high school degree has a 25% chance of being imprisoned in his lifetime. A black man without a high school degree has a 70% chance. Mass incarceration has done massive harm to our communities, our families, our children, and to the millions of people caught up in it. Mass incarceration cannot exist in a healthy society. It is an intentional humanitarian disaster, a war by the ruling class on the poor and the marginalized. Mass incarceration is a choice, but it's their choice, not ours. This is Chase Madar, professor of law for the Gravel Institute.
Man, that was pretty dark just because it actually didn't provide much solutions, but it did at least highlight exactly, what kind of perpetuates the cycle of recidivism and also the criminality of certain communities. And so I like what Gravel is doing because it comes from a good faith argument, because it tries to put everything into proper context and doesn't provide a bunch of rhetorical ammunition to viewers to simply refute any opposition to their own beliefs. But it did provide information that you can add to your knowledge to understand how the world works around you. That might be my own bias. I'm sure somebody who's completely right-wing could see something entirely different. But from what I got from that was information and historical context of how we got to where we are. And that, I feel, is the broader difference between the Gravel Institute and PragerU. And so I would like to thank you for joining me on Tox News. You can find me on Twitter at ToxinPod, ToxnPod. You can see the videos and the not live reactions, but the reactions on YouTube under Tox News. And the intro and outro music was made by me. So why not just, throw more credits around to make this sound more professional than it is. Anyways, join me next time and I will have more toxicity to detoxify, if that is even possible in the conditions of society that we live in now. But other than that, I hope you have a beautiful day and a wonderful life.